Pendulum shading is one of the most versatile techniques that you can have in your back pocket as a tattoo artist. And in today's video, I'm going to show you 7 different variations of this technique that you can do and how to apply them to color, gray wash, so you can get ultra smooth blends every single tattoo. What's up? I'm Nathan from Tattooing 101. I've been in the industry for 12 years now and taught over 8,000 students how to tattoo. Let's get into it. So why is it even called pendulum shading? The goal when you're pendulum shading is you want the machine to swoop in and out of the skin as opposed to going back and forth like that. We want to have like a gentle, kind of almost like a brush motion going in and out of the skin as opposed to just hacking it in there. So you can see how I got like 3 layers of the skin. This is the surface layer. If you put ink in here, it's gonna fall out. This is why you see a lot of tattoos fade within, a week, a month, a couple of months after they're first done. Third layer is basically where you're gonna hurt people. If it goes this deep, you're gonna blow out your lines. You're gonna get horrible scarring and things like that. Sweet spot is right in the middle, okay, which is about anywhere from 1 to 2 millimeters deep, depending on the person, age, gender, all that stuff. So what we want to do when we're pendulum shading, you can see how when the needle swings in and out of the skin, at the base of the motion, it never goes deeper than the second layer of the skin. And then as it swings out of the skin, the depth gets less and less and less. And that's what gives it that light dotted effect and gives it that soft edge when you're moving the needle in and out of the skin. If you just move back and forth like this, then you're going to get very hard edges on your shading and nothing is going to come out smooth. You have to swing the needles in and out like this so that you get those nice smooth fades. Now, before we go ahead and demonstrate the 7 different variations of this, make sure that you smash the like and subscribe button so you don't miss any new tutorial videos that we've got coming out. If you'd like to get some extra help and learn from myself or Brandon directly in person, we have started to do some training workshops live. I'll put all the details down in the description below so you can check it out. So the first one that we're going to be starting with is just doing pendulum shading with straight black. Most important thing that you've got to be focused here on, guys, is just making sure that you've got a nice consistent motion, because as soon as you start to slow down or stop, then you're going to get a lot of patchiness and your shading is not going to come out nice and smooth. I'm going to be using 3mm stroke FK Irons Adjust 1 tattoo machine. They're brand new, they just come out, they're actually really, really nice. Make sure that you got a little bit of glide on your glove, a little bit of glide on the skin, and also on your tattooing hand, you want a little bit of glide there as well, so you can just nice and easily slide back and forth to get that swinging motion on the skin. So we're going to swing in and then swing out, just going back and forth. And when the needle is in the center of each motion, that's when it's the deepest in the skin, and that's when the pigment is going to come out the darkest. So you can see here how it's nice and soft, like all the way around. It's a lot smoother towards the top and the bottom as opposed to on the sides. It's got a little bit harder of an edge there. And you can see needle marks. You see how you can see all these tiny little diagonal lines? That's because this is the position that the needles were moving, and then each time those needles are going up and down, they're hitting in that same pattern as I swing back and forth. Now you can get rid of that, but the way that we've got to do that is by cross hatching, which means we've got to go up and down one way, and then we've got to come from a different direction to hide and conceal all those needle marks and get it even smoother. This is going to work a lot better when you're doing larger areas that require a lot of either saturation or really, really large blends. Cross-hatching is going to be a lot more effective than just simple whip shading back and forth. Just to show you guys, when you go back and forth and you don't maintain a consistent motion through each pass, you can see that it's just super inconsistent. And then it comes out horrible. It's not going to heal well. It's going to be absolutely terrible. Make sure that you're swinging in back and forth and you are consistent with the hand speed. When I start, I go nice and shallow, just scraping the top of the skin. And then as I start to find my groove, I go deeper and deeper until I get to that second layer of the skin. And that's where I stay. It is really important to make sure that you do go deep enough, because if you just scrape the top surface of the skin, yes, you can tattoo it quite a lot without damaging the skin, but it just falls out when it heals. So we're gonna start with, in this box number 2, the next variation that I'm going to be showing you is cross hatching. So I'm gonna start from one direction first. And having a little bit more voltage on your machine will give you less needle marks. Like right now I'm on a 7. If I turn that down to say, a 6, those needle marks are going to become a lot more apparent because the gaps in between where each needle hits the skin are going to be slightly larger. So the lower the voltage is, the slower your hand speed needs to be as well. Great, so that one's decently smooth as well, but again, we can see those needle marks, so then let's come from a different direction. So before we were just going up and down, now we're going to go through and come diagonally. The directions that you go doesn't matter as long as they're different. And the directions can be similar. Like right now, it's just going up like this. If you just go slightly and just change those positions of the needles, you'll get the same effect. Now, if you find even after doing that, you've still got needle marks, it just means you have to go from another different direction, and that's going to conceal it even more. The more directions that you come from, the more smoothed out those needle marks are going to be. So before we went up and down, then we went diagonally, now we're going to go diagonally in the other direction. Now, the lower your voltage, the slower you have to move in order to not space out the needle marks too much, but also the lower your voltage, the less trauma that you cause to the skin and the less ink that it deposits. It's a bit more forgiving, the machine, when the voltage is turned down nice and low. And then as you kind of get more comfortable with the machine that you're using, you get a bit more experience, you can speed it up just a little bit. Like, don't crank it up in a 10 and think that you can just blast it in back and forth like that. You'll burn out your machine really quick and it doesn't always heal super well. I'd much rather kind of cap it at like 8. I don't usually go above 8 volts. Cool, so there you can see, nice and smooth all the way around. If you need to do larger areas that have soft edges all the way around, cross-hatching is gonna be the way to go. Also, when you're doing black and gray, I like using bug pins. Again, it's gonna make it a lot easier to get these nice smooth blends. Thinner gauges in the needles leave smaller holes in the skin, which means smoother blends. So the next shading variation that I'm going to be showing you guys is whip shading. Now, this is pretty much the same thing as pendulum shading, except just half of the motion. So instead of the machine going like swinging on a pendulum, you're just doing half of that motion and then you're coming back in. And there's a couple different ways to do this. You can just do the forward motion where you push the machine out and then you come back to the start and then you just keep doing that forward motion. Or you can whip out and then you can come back into that starting point and then whip out again. The difference is when you arc out and then you arc back in, it's 2 passes instead of 1, which means you're going to saturate the skin faster. But it is a little bit harder to do, so that's the catch. So next up, I want to show you guys whip shading. I'm going to turn my machine up to 7 volts for this one, still on the 3mm stroke, still using a 10 gauge 23 curved. I'm going to whip out from this line. Instead of just going for it straight away, if I know that I'm going to do a long transition from a line, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give myself a bigger area that I can whip out from. It just makes it easier. So what I do is I start with just using the very corner of the mag to do some very, very small ovals. And I'm just gently softening up that edge. So now I've got a huge area that I can whip out from instead of this tiny line. I'm not as worried about accuracy now. You can really only do this sometimes, like if you're doing something very small, intricate and detailed, you may not have the space to do that, but it's just something that I like to do, especially for bigger tattoos. It just gives me a much wider margin of error. So you always want to make sure that if you do this, that you soften the edge so it's not like a hard line that you're whipping out from, because then you'll see an obvious step in your shading. So you start off with very small whips, very light. You're not trying to get a huge distance or anything like that, and you're just trying to soften that edge just a little bit. And this is literally pendulum shading, but much, much shorter. Now I've got a nice soft edge to work out from. Now whip shading gets super, super easy. So I'm gonna start and I'm gonna go nice and long. Nice and consistent. And because my voltage is nice and high at 7, all the needle marks are nice and close together, so I can move fairly quickly, which gives me more consistency without any huge, huge needle marks. So that's pretty decent, nice and whipped out, but it's not perfect. You can still see the needle marks, and you can see little streaks where it's not consistent all the way through. You can do cross-hatching for whip shading as well, and that's gonna smooth all of that right out. If I keep trying to just push forward, you can do it, you can get it nice and smooth, but it's risky because you can run out of space very easily as you just keep pushing that gradient further and further up, and then you're all the way over to the other side of the box and it's still not nice and smooth. So when we cross-hatch it, even if it's not perfect the first time, it just has to be smooth enough so that when the cross-hatching happens, it just blends it all out. So just then we were whipping forwards like that. Now we're gonna change the angle of the machine and I'm gonna whip diagonally like this. So at first it was straight and then I'm going diagonally like this. And you'll see that it's going to get dramatically smoother and all those streaks are going to disappear because not only are the needles in a different position, but I'm also coming from a completely new direction. And right now, again, I'm using the backstroke of the needle. I'm just moving it backwards. It's gonna put less ink into the skin. It's a lot more delicate and gentle because I'm just smoothing it out. I'm not trying to put a ton of pigment into the skin. I wanna be nice and gentle. Cool, so you can see how I got a nice smooth gradient just from cross-hatching. Now if I want to put another color over that, I've got a perfect transition. It's gonna blend really, really well. But what happens when we turn the voltage down super, super low and we try and whip shade, say with a 5 volts, right? You're gonna see a much, much bigger space in between the needle marks, which I'll show you just here. Let's just start with that nice little base first. Now we're gonna whip out from here. So you can just see the difference between this. It's still decently smooth, but it's a lot more choppy around the needle marks. Now, if you're doing traditional, that can be okay, but if you want, realism, like super smooth, seamless blends, this is all black, by the way. There's no gradients or anything like that. You're gonna get a much, much smoother blends when you cross hatch it, and you also increase that voltage just a little bit or really slow down your hand speed. But the problem when you slow down your hand speed a lot is that it's a bit more difficult to keep the motion nice and consistent. When you're moving with a bit of momentum and speed, it's just kind of automatic. You don't even really have to think about keeping things like nice and consistent. You can conceal some of these needle marks by cross hatching it just a little bit, but you'll never quite get it as smooth as if you have a little bit more voltage. You do cross hatch from multiple different directions. Again, this is just straight black. There's no gradients here or anything like that. Same with this one. And you can just see that this one is just that little bit smoother. This is fine for traditional if that's what the look that you're going for. But if you want realism, super smooth, ultra clean blends, a little bit more voltage, lower stroke is the way to go. All right, so let's take a look at the next variation. That's going to be pendulum shading with a mid-tone or a light tone gray wash as opposed to straight black. You do have to be very on point with your hand control for this because even a slight difference in pressure will leave like a darker bit of pigment and just make your shading look choppy and not smooth. So we're going to be using a dynamic black 20% gray wash. Now remember, this will come out a lot lighter on actual human skin. Still the same technique. Turn that voltage up just a bit. Again, start out nice, slow and controlled. And then as you find your groove, start to go a little bit deeper, slow down a little bit towards the middle. And when you are pendulum shading with gray wash, like it doesn't always have to start with black. Like right now I'm starting with 20% and I'm gonna fade this out with an even lighter gray wash, but you can start from a mid-tone. You're not always required to go through the entire value scale in every transition that you do on a tattoo. Cool, so that is the 20%. Now I'm gonna use 10%, which is just 20 diluted by half. And we're gonna cross hatch it. Because it's such a light gray wash as well, it's very forgiving. We can be quite loose with this. This is gonna be really helpful for realism because a lot of the times you have to be strategic about where you put your blacks and you're gonna be starting from a lot of midtones in fairly light areas of the tattoo. Cool, so you can see that's nice and smooth around all edges. You've just got to be a little bit careful when you're doing pendulum shading with gray wash because on average, when you tattoo a person, it's going to heal about 30% lighter than what it is when it's fresh. So if it looks really, really light when it's fresh, it's going to be even more so when it heals. And that's why you see like a lot of portraits, they look great when they're fresh, but as soon as they're healed, they've aged like 10 years. You want your portraits to be a little bit darker than what they should be when they're fresh, so that when they heal, the values are exactly what they're supposed to be. So if I was tattooing an actual person's skin, I wouldn't start with like the 20% then go to 10. I wouldn't even use 10% gray wash. If I was tattooing a person, I'd just go black, 80, 60, 40, 20. I'd start with like a 40, a mid-tone, a nice mid-tone, 40%, and then I'd blend that out in the 20. Gray wash will absolutely help you make smoother gradients than just whipping out black on its own. Because the lighter washes are more diluted, they're a lot closer to skin tone than black, and it's just much easier to fade out a lighter gray wash than just a black all the way to skin tone. It's important to remember that when you are whipping out your black or your darker tones, they don't have to be 100% perfect. They just have to be smooth enough so that when you put the next wash over the top of it, you can smooth it out and then fade that out again. And the lighter you go, the easier it is to get a nice transition to skin tone. Now, the next variation, we're gonna start out with black and then we're gonna fade that all the way out to skin tone. There's two different ways that you can do this, right? The way that me and Brandon tattoo, we go from dark to light. There are a lot of tattooers that will actually start with the lightest wash and then gradually darken it as if you would if you were like airbrushing. The reasoning behind that is that when you break the skin with a lighter wash, first of all, it's super forgiving. Like I said before, you're not going to put a whole bunch of extra pigment that you don't need into the skin. But once the skin is also broken, it takes the ink very easily. So you don't have to go super hard to get those darker gradients in. You just have to lightly brush over the top and they go in very, very easily. So I'm gonna show you the way that we do it, which is from dark to light. So I'm just starting out with black. Going to cross hatch this just a little bit, just to soften it out. Again, I'm not worried about getting it 100% perfect all the way around because that's what those lighter washes are for. Again, I just have to make it smooth enough so that the next lightest wash can conceal the step between the two gradients or the two different washes. All right, cool. So there's my black. You can tell it's not quite 100% smooth, but again, it's gonna be smooth enough for me to put that next gradient over the top. So we're gonna go from black to a 40%. Again, because gray wash looks a lot darker on fake skin, I am having to use much lighter washes, but if I was on an actual person, I would go from like a black to an 80 or a 60. Just note that the more washes that you skip, the smoother the original section of black needs to be. So going from like a black to an 80%, it's very easy to blend. You barely need to whip it out at all, but to go from a black to a 20%, that fade has to be perfect. And I'm just pendulum shading around the sides. And then once that section of black gets big enough too, you don't even have to pendulum shade it. You can just whip shade from the black outwards, because if you're using a 40%, it's not going to make the black look uneven because it's so much darker. Plus, the more times that you go over the middle, the more trauma it's going to cause and the more likely you are to overwork the skin. Cool, so I've just gone through with the 40% and we smoothed it out a lot. Now we're gonna go down to the 20%. And again, because it's so light, this is when you can start to get real loose with it. And it's easy to get cleaner fades when you're nice and loose, so you're not all tight and rigid like when you have to be with the black, because if one wrong pass, and you can put in way too much pigment and then the section is like, ruined. But it's very forgiving when you're in the lighter washes. One pass in the wrong place isn't really gonna show up that much. Cool, so that's the 20%, now switching to the 10. And again, a lot of these, when you use such a light gradient on actual skin, it's gonna be very difficult to see once it heals. I wouldn't do like large sections or saturations with a wash so light. It's more just for smoothing out edges. So you can see the main difference between the box where we started with black and then the box where we started with just a lighter shade. It took me a lot more distance or a lot more space to fade this out to skin tone because we're starting from a darker value. So if you have a lot more space, you can start from black, but if you don't have a whole lot of room and you need to blend into skin tone, starting from a lighter wash is gonna make that a lot easier. The next variation of shading we're gonna be looking at is going to be stippling, that we're gonna be using with a 3 liner. It's gonna be a 10 gauge, 3-round liner, and we're going to be just using that same motion when we're pendulum shading, except because it's a different needle, we're gonna get a much different looking effect. And I've also changed the stroke on my machine to a 5 that I can penetrate that skin nice and easily. And I've got the voltage turned down to 5. It's as low as I can go. And it really helps when you have a 5mm stroke for doing this type of shading, because when you turn the voltage down quite low, the needle can snag because it has trouble penetrating the skin. A longer stroke is gonna have a lot more velocity. You won't have that issue as much, and it's just gonna give you much smoother tones. Cool, so that's just going by one way. If I turn the voltage up a little, say to 6, it will allow me to move my hand a little bit faster, and as long as you get a nice separation between the dots, you're still gonna get it nice and smooth. So we're going up and down before, now we're going diagonally. I'm gonna go diagonally the other way. And yeah, it's just the same motion that we were doing before. I can go a little bit faster just because there's a lot less surface tension and breakthrough when I'm using a 3-round liner as opposed to a mag. It's less sharps and it goes in very, very easily, so I'm able to move quite quick. And because the needle is so small and it causes such minimal trauma to the skin, you can do quite a lot of layers. You sort of have to, because the needle's so small and it covers such a small amount of area. You have to really build this up to get it nice and smooth. And again, once you are starting to smooth out the edges, you can just whip shade from the center. And if you find that the ink is not depositing enough into the skin, we can reduce the depth a little bit so that we get better ink flow. So that's how we do pepper shading. Every time that you want to make it darker, just change the direction. You have to do a lot of cross hatching with this in order to build up the layers, because again, if you just keep going back and forth in the same direction, it's not going to come out smooth and you're just going to hack deeper and deeper into the skin. So lots and lots of layers, lots of different directions you have to go to build this up and make it nice and smooth. If you are going to be doing a lot of stippling shading, when it gets to areas in the design that are solid black, I'd recommend doing those with a mag and then just fading out the solid black and then starting the pepper shading after that, because it's just going to save you a lot of time. Getting solid black black with a 3-liner or even a 10 gauge 3-liner takes a lot of time, and you can speed up the process dramatically by just using a mag, fade it out, and then do all your pepper shading with your liner away from that. So next up, we're gonna be taking a look at shading with color. Now this is a lot harder than doing with black and gray. Not only do you have to worry about the values of the colors, but you've also got color harmonies and color theory to take into account. You know, certain colors go well together, like, you know, purple and yellow, and other colors do not go well together, and they look quite strange if you put, you know, one next to the other. You might have noticed that you've done a color tattoo in the past and it was done really, really well, but because you chose the wrong types of colors, even though, you know, they go from dark to light, it looks like shit because the colors are just whack. So you've got to choose colors that are either triadic, tetradic, analogous color harmonies to help you pick those color schemes. Highly recommend getting a color wheel for that. But when it comes to just pendulum shading with color, the technique is fairly similar. It's just a little bit more difficult to get it nice and saturated and fully consistent, because we do want to fully saturate that skin so that it ages well over time. Whereas with black and gray, we're just fading it out. We're relying on that skin tone to come through to lighten the wash, whereas with color, we want it to be fully saturated. So I'm going to change my machine to a 5mm stroke. We're going to start with red, and then we're going to blend that into a nice pink. So same deal. We're just going to pack it for a little bit. Cool, we've got a nice little edge to whip out from now. Right now we're just whip shading, same as we were doing with black and gray, and the slower we go, the more saturated the skin is going to get. Now the reason why we're doing like these nice and long whips is because it's going to help blend into the other color. Cross hatching now, we're just pendulum shading to hide some of those needle marks, which will allow us to get that color nice and smooth. Cool, so that's our first color. Now we're going to switch to pink. And what we want to do is that part that we've whipped out, that's where we want to pendulum shade on top of. That's where the center or the deepest part of the motion is going to be. We're going to whip out a little bit onto that red because we want that pink to go onto that red that we've packed in a little bit. But the deepest part or the strongest part of this pink is going to be on that red section that's nice and whipped out. And we're going to go nice and slow to help saturate it. So you can see by going nice and slow, and again, finding a clean spot on the paper towel so I'm not just staining it with that darker red, we've got a lot of saturation that's nice and solid. And we can cross hatch it again just to make sure. And the cool thing about when you pack color / pendulum shade like this, you're doing the minimum amount of passes that you possibly can, and cross hatching gets you the most amount of saturation with the least amount of risk. You're going to go a little bit further back onto that red, pendulum shade it just to help blend, and this will mix within the skin. Now we're going to fade this pink out. Now keep in mind, when you are blending colors together, the similar the colors are, or the more similar the colors are to each other in terms of hue, the easier they're going to blend together. So I just blended a straight brick red into a lollipop pink, and it's not bad. If you want to get it even smoother, you would just mix a little bit of both of those colors together so that you have a mid-tone, and that would smooth it out even more. So up next, we're gonna blend that lollipop pink out into a flesh pot. So you can see as well, when I have my machine on an angle like this, the reason for that is because it deposits more ink into the skin and it puts the needle sharps closer together so that I'm not going to get as many streaks with each pass. It helps me deposit a lot more ink into the skin and get my fades a lot smoother when I have my machine on a slight angle when I go in and out of the skin. And I'm also kind of dipping in a little bit between the lollipop and the flesh pot just to show you guys how smooth you can get it. Alright, so we're just using the flesh pot now. So we're just going over very lightly, just with a mid-tone or a slight blend between that brick red and the lollipop pink, just to show you guys, if you do use that mid-tone, you can get it that much smoother. So the biggest thing to remember when you're shading with color, you don't always have to use that packing method where you're going in super small ovals. That's more for when you want to do solid fills. When you got a lot of transitions and blends, using that slow pendulum motion gives you a much smoother gradient on each side, allows you to do a lot wider areas a lot quicker and blend them in other colors. You want to have a solid bit of that color where it's fully saturated again so that it ages well, and then you whip a little bit of it out. And then if you want to be super smooth, you mix that dark color with the next lightest color to get a mid-tone. Again, you pendulum shade, not the solid part, but the part you've just whipped out. So not here, but just about here where we whipped out all this red, that's where we pendulum shaded that mixture of brick red and lollipop pink. And then we did the same thing, we whipped that out again, and then we went in with a lollipop pink, nice and slow, making sure that the needles were on an angle like this, as opposed to flat like this, because when the needles are on an angle, all the sharps get closer together, you deposit a lot more ink into the skin, and it goes in a lot smoother with less passes. And you slow down when you're doing each pass. You don't want to go super quick because then you're not going to saturate the skin. When you go nice and slow, it goes in fully solid, and then when you cross hatch it as well, you get rid of any streaks or needle marks while causing minimal amounts of additional trauma because the needles are going in a different placement when you're changing the direction that you're going in. Always remember, do your colors last because it is very easy to stain color with black. You can see that there's a little bit of pink on this stippling part. When you're tattooing an actual person, the darker pigment is always going to show through. So colors are not going to stain your blacks, but your blacks will definitely stain your colors. So you want to do those last. And when you do whip out one color into the next and you're pendulum shading on the part that's whipped out, you want to make sure that a little bit of that transition goes onto the solid color just before it that you've just packed in. So then it nicely blends it all together. Now there's a lot more when it comes to tattooing with color. We could do an entire video on that just on its own. If you have any questions about blending colors together or saturating color, pop them down in the comments. If we get enough interest, we can definitely make a separate video on that as well. Now, if you're still watching the video up until this point, we have covered a lot. You've learned 7 different variations of shading techniques that are going to be useful in just about any tattoo that you do. But if your goal is to become a professional tattoo artist, there's only so much that you can learn by just browsing through free videos on YouTube. Don't get me wrong, you can learn a lot, but the artists that get the best results when it comes to learning how to tattoo are the ones that have structure, they have a plan, they have guidance, and they have mentorship. If you're ready to start taking tattooing seriously and actually get the help and guidance that you need to do this professionally, I'll put a link below down to the Artist Accelerator Program that will take you from being a complete beginner to a professional tattoo artist and give you all the steps and information and resources that you need along the way. That's all for this video, guys. If you liked it, make sure you smash the like and subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.